Welcome to A.U.M, also known as Ask Us Marketing. I'm your host, Kalli Fedusenko of Kalli Collective, a digital marketing agency designed to build relationships between advisors and their target audience through data-driven websites, content, and advertising. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can scan the QR code below my face. This episode is brought to you by the Financial Planning Association, otherwise known as the FPA. FPA is a great resource center providing education, support, and networking opportunities for advisors like you. So, regulations are tightening, and staying compliant has never been more critical. We're sitting down with returning guest Andrew Shedlock, an expert in financial industry regulations, for a deep dive into the FINRA SEC regulations that are currently being enforced. He'll walk us through the latest updates, what they mean for your practice, and how to avoid common pitfalls. So let's get informed and empowered. Join with me, Andrew Shedlock. Hey, Andrew.
Hi, Kalli. How are you?
I'm good. And, I'm so glad that we know you because you keep us all safe.
Hey, I try. And I want to say, of course, thank you for having me back. It's a pleasure to be here again and great chance to connect with your audience again. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So of course we've got some new rules, newer rules that were passed regarding testimonials, which we've covered, but there's other things that are going on. What would you say are the most significant regulations currently being enforced?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, obviously, I don't know if we noticed, but in the past couple of months, there's been a presidential election and change in
Really?
administrations.
Just
Yeah,
kidding.
I don't know was aware of that. But with that comes, really a change in the regulations
Mm,
that are being enforced in terms of FINRA and the SEC. And I think a lot of people have spent quite a bit of time over the last few months trying to read the proverbial tea leaves. What will
mhm.
happen with FINRA? What will happen with the SEC now that there's a change in administration? And
Yeah.
so, we talk about things being enforced. I think recently with the SEC, we saw a lot of not leftover cases, but a lot of matters and
Mm,
proceedings and settlements that were, being handled by the previous composition of the SEC. A lot of, or at least some crypto matters, things like that, that we're not going to
okay.
see from the SEC. In terms of
Mm,
FINRA, less
mhm.
change will be happening there. However,
Okay.
discussion will now start to percolate to the surface. Will
Mm.
FINRA really exist as a regulatory body in the next couple of years? Now,
Oh.
yeah, do I think that's likely? No, I think FINRA will stick around. Is it possible that there's some sort of push to consolidate FINRA or eliminate it and merge it with the SEC? Potentially. I mean, you know, we'll
So,
see what
okay,
that.
I'm sure our audience probably knows way more on this than I do, but what is it that FINRA is in charge of versus the SEC that you can get in trouble for?
Sure. So FINRA regulates the conduct of broker dealers and
Mm,
those registered as FINRA broker dealers or associated persons of broker dealers across the country. Whereas the SEC, polices, the SEC has ultimate authority over FINRA, but they're
mm,
separate and distinct. So the SEC, regulates investment advisors, fiduciaries, obviously financial advisors and investment advisors with assets under management exceeding $100 million.
okay.
So we have the SEC and FINRA kind of operating in two worlds, but in separate worlds,
Mm,
um, but in the same world. I mean, think of it like an egg. The SEC controls the egg, FINRA is within the egg. The
okay.
SEC um, really controls, could control what FINRA does more. A lot of the proposals, or at least some of the proposals we've seen from the current administration, maybe not proposals per se, but discussion points,
Okay.
have revolved around, potentially eliminating or consolidating FINRA. Now, do I think that's likely or probable? No. I mean, I think that's a yeoman's worth of work that could, come to be had. But is it something we could see or discuss in the next several
Mm,
years? Yes. Now, practically for your audience, for my clients, what does that mean? I mean, not much now. I
okay.
mean, eliminating FINRA is not going to, you know, change what advisors can and can't do.
Yeah.
But I think the theme of the discussion we'll have today will be a lot of change and a lot of
Mm.
not cataclysmic or catastrophic change, but monumental change, not
Mm.
incremental change for sure.
Interesting. Are there specific areas of focus that the new administration is more concerned about than other areas?
Definitely, definitely. I mean, just looking at it from the SEC perspective, in terms of, who are we talking to today?
Mhm.
Your clients are financial advisors, um, a lot of state registered advisors, a lot of SEC registered advisors. So, setting aside what state advisors are subject to, I get a lot of
Mm.
questions saying, I'm a state advisor. Do I
Mm.
have to follow the SEC marketing rule? Do I have to
Right.
follow the SEC cybersecurity disclosure rule? No, I mean, technically not. I mean, are they informative and helpful to state registered advisors? Of course. Do they have influence over the state? Yes, of course.
Mm.
I mean, is a Tennessee state registered advisor who is, regulated by the appropriate Tennessee department bound to follow SEC rules on marketing? No. But,
Mm.
things we've seen, I mean, the marketing the marketing rule was a big one.
Yeah.
Obviously, we discussed quite a bit. We discussed testimonials there. That is in place. Seems like one that's not necessarily controversial. Other
Mm.
rules like the cybersecurity disclosure rule,
Mm.
advisors and public companies and registrants, in very, very broad strokes here, have a duty to disclose certain quote material cybersecurity disclosure incidents to the SEC under a rule that was passed and took into effect over the past several years of the
Okay.
previous SEC.
So, like, if
So
something happens, like a hack, that's where this regulation comes into play?
essentially, yeah. I mean, of
Okay.
course, there are nuances to the rule, but if we're talking about, I'm an SEC registered RIA. There's
Mhm.
data breach. There's a hack. There's now certain requirements I have to do.
Mm. Okay.
Cybersecurity is one area where this current SEC, or maybe even FINRA, would be, I don't want to say more lax, but definitely a little bit, will treat that different than the previous SEC.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of looking at a more of a gloves off approach in
Mm.
terms of regulation as opposed to gloves on. And we
Mm.
haven't even started talking about crypto yet, which is where a lot of the fun is.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering is I've heard a lot about crypto and it's going to be coming back. But it sounds like it's going to be maybe more regulated or is it going to be less regulated?
That's a good question. And I think,
Yeah.
when we talk about regulation, I think a lot of crypto participants complained about previous iterations of the SEC, specifically, under Chair Gensler. There was regulation, but it was what's known as regulation by enforcement. So
Mm.
regulation through lawsuit,
Ew.
regulation by
No thanks.
enforcement action. Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot of, hey, we don't know the rules of the road.
Yeah.
So when we, create or distribute a crypto product or engage in a crypto related action, the SEC says you can't do that. And then the
Mm.
industry participants say, well, what are the rules of the road? I know if I'm driving down, I-94 here in Minneapolis, the speed limit's 70 miles an hour. Okay, if
Mhm.
I go over 70, I could get a ticket. Crypto participants, on the other hand, may say, I'm going down this new crypto road
Yeah.
and I don't even know what kind of car I'm supposed to be driving, how fast I'm going. Do I have to signal before I make a turn? Things like that. So, what I think we'll see from this SEC, from Commissioners Ueda, from Chair Atkins or Chair Designee Atkins,
Mm.
and from Commissioner Purse, are more rules of the road.
Mm.
There's already been, the establishment of a crypto task force. So, we talk about regulation. Now we're likely to get, and I don't know how long this will take, but we're likely going to get a lot of rules of the road for crypto, not only
Yeah.
for crypto industry participants, but hopefully for service providers and broker dealers or RIAs who want to discuss, meddle in, offer, discuss crypto with their clients. What are the rules of the road here?
Right.
Because we haven't had any.
Yeah. All new. What would you say are some of the most common compliance mistakes that advisors are making or have made that could have been avoided?
Yeah, so a lot of this is, I want to say it's simple stuff, but it's
Mhm.
not simple until you spend a lot of time and money figuring out what you could have done differently.
Sure.
So let's start with, compliance manuals, written
Mm.
supervisory procedures, things like that. I mean, a lot of clients that we work with, everyone should have a compliance consultant. Hopefully, no one's winging it on
Mm.
their own,
Mhm.
but your compliance consultant should keep you up to date on what needs to happen in terms of, let's talk about like solicitor rules and
Mhm.
marketing and things like that. Um, if you're paying, if I'm an advisor, whether SEC or state registered, and I'm paying someone to do something,
Yeah.
I'm paying a service to put my name out there. I'm
Mhm.
obviously paying someone to go market my firm. I mean, there are clear rules out there about what has to be disclosed to clients. Is the
Okay.
person engaging in the service, receiving cash compensation, things like that.
Mm.
And these are simple paragraphs to add to your written supervisory procedures if you're a
Mhm.
broker dealer, or to add to your compliance manual if you're an investment advisor. Now, adding these things to your manuals or your procedures isn't enough for the SEC or for
Right.
FINRA. I mean, it's all about showing your work.
Yeah.
Okay, I say that I will disclose X, Y, and Z. Well, if I
Mhm.
put that on my manual or procedures and don't follow up with it and don't actually do it and can't prove to the SEC or the regulator that I'm doing it, what's the point? So
Mhm.
it's really work with your compliance consultant to make sure your manuals and procedures are correct, and then have documentation and backup.
Mm.
This is a simple one. You know, engaging in an annual review
Mm.
for a broker or for an advisor. I mean, a
Yeah.
simple thing. Every manual is going to have that. This firm engages in an annual review consisting of A through T.
Mm.
We audit these accounts, we do this, we review these customer agreements, we spot check this. Okay, that's great. But
Mhm.
when the regulator comes calling, or you're a newly registered SEC investment advisor, and the SEC says, okay, show me the documents
Yeah.
about your annual compliance review, there should be folders, there should be files showing exactly what you did. And again, most compliance consultants, 99% of them, are going to be able to direct you how to do this. But
Should
that's the
a
low hanging fruit.
compliance consultant be an attorney or like what kind of qualifications does a compliance consultant need to have?
A lot of compliance consultants are attorneys. Some
Okay.
aren't. They don't need to be per se. I mean, I obviously know and work with a few that I really trust and respect. There's a whole industry out there, and
Right.
I'm glad to provide names to any of your clients, the people that I trust out there.
Yeah.
But what it comes down to is, a lot of times compliance consultants work with me, or there's a matter, and they say,
Mm.
okay, we need to edit and revise this U4 language. What do we say in here? What can we say?
Mhm.
What can't we say? But your compliance consultant should not just be taking their materials and pasting them onto your firm. I
Mm.
mean, not only is that a bit lazy, but it's also not doing their duty.
Mhm.
Every firm is different. Even though, 90% of the firms out there are the same in terms of what they do, the clients they serve. I mean, everyone has a different model.
Right.
If you have, if you're a firm that has a work from home model, you don't have a
Mhm.
central office. You have 4 employees all in different states, they all work from home. Your data retention policies are going to be different. Your
Mm.
confidentiality policies are going to be different
Right.
than a firm that has, 5 advisors in, small town Wyoming that come into the same office every day. So, most compliance consultants work with them to
Yeah.
figure out exactly what needs to be in there, but don't just copy and paste. Never a good start.
What kinds of information are you not allowed to share with a contractor that you're working with? Because I've had both, with clients that I work with. Some are like, I can't tell you any of my client names. Like if I'm sending out an email, sometimes I can't even get access to the email platform that to send it out. Other times, it's pretty they're pretty um they let me do kind of anything.
Yep.
What would you say, is that just firm to firm, or is there some sort of regulation that the SEC prosecutes using?
Yeah, so Regulation SP is the classic SEC rule that governs this type of information sharing. And in very short order,
Mhm.
Regulation SP is designed to protect and preserve the privacy of clients, financial information, income levels, social security numbers, telephone numbers, email addresses, things like that. And
Mhm.
so what's really important there is that, not only do firms understand exactly what, what their obligations are, but obviously when you talk about contractors, you're right. Some firms may have rules and guidelines that are different based on state registration or federal registration. But what's important for the firm is to figure out with your compliance consultant, with an attorney,
Mhm.
with someone like me, what information can and can't we share. A lot
Mm.
of the times, less disclosure is better, but sometimes that's not what's required. The
Yeah.
last thing a firm or a contractor needs, is sharing information with
Mm.
someone they haven't told clients they're going to share information with.
Mm.
So if your form CRS or your literature or your disclosures don't say that, we can share your information with whoever,
Yeah.
don't do that. Now, sometimes clients opt out of all information sharing, and firms should
Mm.
respect that. But really, I think we just talked about, um, what are the things that advisors get in trouble for? It's things
Right.
like that. Your form CRS or your ADV says something like, we eliminate, we manage and eliminate all conflicts of interest. And the SEC views that as low hanging fruit because no advisor can eliminate all conflicts of interest.
Okay.
I mean, the
Okay.
advisor's duty is to say, hey, we have a conflict. We sell this product and make
Right.
this recommendation. There's a conflict. We can't eliminate it, but we work to mitigate it by saying X, Y, and Z.
Mhm.
So if your ADV or your form CRS is saying, hey, we won't share your information with anyone without your consent, then before giving your client's email addresses out to a contractor, I would hope that firm would solicit, client, feedback or client permission to
Mhm.
share that information. So that's a really
Mhm.
good point to make there. Um, so that's one area where I think advisors can, you have to follow what your documents say, and if things change, if your form CRS changes, your ADV changes, your Part 2 brochure changes, you know, update those accordingly and republish
Right.
them to your clients.
What about prospects? Are there do the same rules apply to them as clients?
Well, I mean, likely prospects, without knowing, without having specifics,
Mhm.
prospects might be different. They're not clients per se.
Mhm.
But obviously, any marketing or solicitation you put out there has to be materially, accurate, truthful, has to fully state, your disclosures. I mean, we saw those marketing rules that came out and those marketing orders that came out, I think, in the fall, touting, I was a top 100 advisor. Well,
Mhm.
that was a top 100 advisor from, 2009, and it's no longer applicable. So,
Right. Yes, yes. Putting the
and
dates. Yeah.
yeah, and so a lot of that's just very much like, hey, just make sure your website says exactly what you're going to say.
Mhm.
And I think, we talked about regulations being enforced here. And I think one thing that, is really interesting to me is, advisors' use of AI. We're
Mhm.
going to have a lot of disclosures and a lot of issues about AI
Yeah.
because just like crypto was kind of, I'll call it the quote unquote new technology over the past 4 to 8 years. I know
Yeah.
it's been around much longer than that. But I think a lot more advisors are going to have questions about artificial intelligence, about
Mhm.
generative artificial intelligence. Obviously we don't need advisors plugging their clients' confidential information into
Right.
ChatGPT or deep research or any sort of Gemini AI stuff like that. But I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit in terms of communications to clients that firms can
Mhm.
use with AI. Now,
Mhm.
we've already seen FINRA really hone in on this, and FINRA said in its 2025 Enforcement Priorities Report, AI will be a big area of disclosure and regulation for advisors.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean? It means again, go through your forms, figure out
Mm.
what do your forms, your ADV, your CRS, your website say about AI. Now,
Mhm.
most of these are probably nothing. I mean, most of these forms probably don't say anything about them.
Right.
But if you are going to use generative AI to communicate with clients or, you know, make investment recommendations for clients, and there's plenty of RIAs out there now that are using AI to make recommendations for clients.
Okay.
Make sure make sure you know what's going on and you've properly disclosed to clients because I'm guessing a lot of clients probably don't want that and would be opposed to it. And that's a
Right.
new hot area coming up.
Yeah. I had someone, I can't remember what the rule is, something about impersonating, I think, where it almost implied that a third party producing content can't be used by an advisor. Have you heard anything like that, or what would that be referring to?
I'm not sure off the top of my head what that is, but I think it could definitely be coming into more fruition here over the next couple of years.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Is there
Mm.
anything that people that I'm creating content for should be doing now in preparation to make sure they don't get in trouble later?
Well, I mean, anytime you're looking at AI, I mean, you're thinking about, you know, client confidentiality first and
Mhm.
foremost. For example, like my law firm won't necessarily let us use AI
Yeah.
in terms of generating content because of client confidentiality concerns. So
Mhm.
first and foremost, whatever you put into these models, you have to make sure that once it's into these models, it's stuck there and it's
Mhm.
available for public consumption. But second, it's also copyright issues. It's also making sure that, whatever the generative AI um,
Right.
produces isn't something that's
Um,
violating any
yeah,
laws or
I
anything like
wasn't
that.
talking necessarily AI, but another person. Like, let's say you're like, "Hey, Callie, write my social media content," but you're an advisor. Do you have to put something in there like, "Oh, I didn't write this," or is there any sort of regulation that advisors have to adhere to, letting people know if they're the ones who wrote a blog article or a social media post?
Nothing that I'm familiar with off the top of my head, and if
Okay.
there is and I don't know it, that's pretty bad, but that's something good to look into for sure. I'm just thinking of the advisors I work with.
Yeah.
Nothing jumps off the top of my head there, but obviously, making sure what you say to clients is truthful and accurate is of critical importance.
Right. Right. Do you see anything with AI that you're like, "Oh, yeah, I think this might be a problem in the future?"
I mean, outside of client confidentiality concerns, in terms of, advisors saying, "Hey, I want to, I have this situation." I mean, we see these posts all the time.
Mhm.
Advisors are saying, "Here's my client situation. Income level, age, divorced, widowed, whatever.
Mhm.
What would you do?" I mean, that's such an easy thing to put
Mm.
into generative AI and get something cookie cutter spit out or something specific spit out.
Yeah.
That's difficult. And I think a lot of it too comes down to the fact that, advisors can use AI to make general recommendations,
Mhm.
but it has to be within the bounds of, what their firm can do. If you're on your own, that's one thing. But if you're part of a team or, you're using
Mhm.
AI, you better make sure you know what your boss or your firm or your compliance department says about that. So,
Right.
the last thing you need is to try and I don't think AI necessarily cuts corners. I think it makes things more efficient. It's very
Mm.
helpful. It's very powerful. But I
Mhm.
think this is something that people are going to say, "Man, I'm a little behind here.
Yeah.
Can you draft my form ADV for me? Can you draft my form CRS? Stuff like that." So
Right.
figuring out those edges is important, and figuring out and an advisor's understanding that once you put something into a large language model,
Mhm.
it's there forever. It's publicly consumed. And so
Mm.
I think we could see a lot of regulation or a lot of discussion from this current SEC and especially from FINRA about AI and about the use of AI going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, okay, so what I picked up from this is that you should have a compliance consultant. Make sure your forms are updated, that they're reflecting what you're actually doing. Are there any other tools or strategies that you would recommend advisors use to simplify compliance?
Yeah, I mean, what I would do is if I'm an advisor, I'm signing up for the SEC emails.
Mm. Mm.
Anytime an administrative proceeding or order comes out, I want to get that and understand what's
Yeah.
going on. Now, a lot of these proceedings and orders are coming out of, they're coming out of public actors or, classic investment fraud, things like that. But,
Mhm.
I want to know if there's a whole slew of marketing actions coming out, and I want to read about it firsthand. So
Yeah.
I think going directly to the source, and I mean, these things take 3 to 5 minutes to read normally for just the average person. You
Yeah.
can figure out what's going on. So
I didn't even know
getting
they had an email.
they
So
do. I mean, it like daily, weekly, whenever there's a big order that comes out. I mean,
Mhm.
anytime you get a whole slew of orders, like like off-channel communications, text messages, things like that.
Oh, yeah.
That came out.
Okay.
And that was a big thing. And I think that's something we see the SEC step away from and say, hey, we're kind of done with the text messaging, off-channel communications thing. There's no
Oh,
rule
they don't
there.
allow it anymore?
Oh no, I think the SEC would say, hey, we're not in the enforcement mode of off-channel communications
Got
cases.
it. Okay.
Yeah,
So they
I
kind of
can't
like
see it. Go ahead.
focus on something and then move their attention to something else, and then maybe only are prosecuting if it's a major issue after they've focused on it.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think
Okay.
and I think just the changing of the administration, the changing of the commissioners, there's less emphasis on regulations about off-channel communications, things like that, and more emphasis on what they call bread and butter issues with the SEC, investor
Mm.
fraud, retail investor protection, things like that.
Okay, I am currently actually, you know what? I'll share my screen. Give me 1 second here.
Sure.
Okay. So where can I sign up for the email?
Oh wow, you really put me on the spot here. Okay. Geez. Usually it's in press releases or something like that, or media or communications, something like that.
Let's
Um,
see.
there you go. We just got a comment with the SEC subscription
Oh,
page.
did we?
Yep. Thanks, Derek.
Awesome. All right. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
And I think this is important. I mean, this is, it's boots on the ground type stuff about like, hey, what's the SEC doing? Sometimes my own clients pop up in these things for,
Mhm.
not perfect reasons, but it's always good to know, like, okay, well, this advisor did this, I need to stay away from that. Or,
Mhm.
if I'm, and this is why you need an attorney early in an investigation matters. But a lot of times, maybe not a
Mm.
lot of times, sometimes advisors get, extraordinary cooperation credit
Mm.
for, working with the SEC or the regulator early, self-disclosing, things like that.
Okay.
Great example. You had a cybersecurity hack,
Yeah.
something like that.
Mhm.
You're required under the rules to disclose that. But think of other
Mm.
issues where it's like, hey, we found this. We know this is a violation. Instead
Mhm.
of waiting for the SEC to come around in an audit or an exam to find it, let's just disclose and get it out there, and we'll go from there. And that's something you work with your compliance consultant and especially your attorney on.
Okay, interesting. Speaking of if someone has a cybersecurity hack, not next week, because next week is President's Day, but the week after that, we'll be talking about public relations and what to do in a crisis.
There you
So
go.
they'll help us walk through how to handle that kind of situation
Quite
if you ever
timely.
find
Quite
yourself in
timely.
it, because it's pretty common now. I mean, people get hacked all the time.
Oh yeah, it's not going away. It's a tale as old as time for sure.
Yeah. This was great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for sharing
Absolutely.
with us once again how we can be safe.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be here. Glad to provide any sort of annual update for your listeners and your clients. And it's never a dull moment in the SEC or FINRA. That's for sure.
Okay, now, okay, here we go. I was like, I don't know if I can get Derek's comment off of here. um, Thank you again.
Absolutely.
And for those who are joining us, we recently changed our email. We are no longer sending it weekly. We have transitioned to a monthly release schedule, maybe a little kinder on your inbox. So make sure you sign up because you won't want to miss these updates when they are released. And as I stated before, we are not meeting for A.U.M next week, but we will be meeting in 2 weeks, February 24th, where we will be talking about public relations and what to do in a crisis situation. For instance, what if you get hacked? Should you share that? How should you share that? What are the best ways to make yourself look good? So join us then, and I will